HVAC 360 is brought to you today by Black Friday sales at Lefty's Construction Mart. Looking for the perfect stocking stuffers? Look no further. This Friday at Lefty's, we have 3 products that will be a slam dunk. First is a steering wheel cover with, get this, banana peel print. That's right, this slip and drive cover will be a perfect fit for any tin knocker in your life. Next, we have large, empty Hillbilly Dew bottles for that contractor friend who is always on the go, go, go. No brakes slowing him down. Lastly, for those engineers on your list who like to play with their food, we have Mega Waffle Blocks. Build to your heart's content, and when you're hungry, just add some maple syrup and dig into your creation. So for this holiday season, remember, shop early, shop often, shop Lefty's Construction Mart. Hey, what's up? Welcome back. Matt Nelson here, your host for HVAC 360, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. We simply put, we do that by sharing lessons learned from the field and talking with industry experts. But I don't stop there. I want to encourage you to double down on your weekly helping of HVAC knowledge by hopping on over to HVAC360.com and joining my growing community of people just like you. This Friday, I'm going to be rolling out something special for Black Friday. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Those people on the list will know. I have a limited space, and only people on my email list were going to get a first shot and the deep discount at what we're rolling out. So this, in fact, may never even go public. All right, so what's up for this week? This week, in the holiday spirit, I'm going to be talking about sampling. Not the delicious dish variety, however, but the sampling that happens during commissioning. This is a topic I know I continue to harp on, but I keep learning new lessons from projects I go on, and I just want to share those. So here we go. Let's get back to basics. Let's talk about what ASHRAE Guideline 0 says. So ASHRAE Guideline 0 starts off with a definition, and they talk about quality-based sampling. Okay, that's their they just don't list sampling. It's quality-based sampling, and their definition is a process for evaluating a subject, a sample of a total population. The sample is based on known or estimated probability distribution of expected values. An assumed statistical distribution based on data from a similar project, assembly, or system, or a random sampling that has scientific statistical basis. All right, now that is an absolute mouthful. And I think that, anybody who just takes a second to look at this definition knows that there's a bunch of red flags that pop out. Basically estimated probability. I mean, nobody does that. If a statistical distribution, we're not statisticians, we're engineers, we're contractors, we're people who work in the real world. And then when they have scientific, random sampling that has scientific statistical basis, frankly, I don't see it. However, they do have an entire annex, and that's just kind of like an appendix. They just call it an annex. Annex N is for some ideas, some samples to some sampling strategies to review for your project. Now, I think it's important to say is regardless of how you feel about the topic of sampling, you need to spell it out clearly in your commissioning plan. So I'll leave it there. We'll get into it a little bit more later. So where can sampling happen? We talk about it, and it's actually, when I was looking at the Guideline 0 again for the first time in a long while, it did pop out at me that you can actually use it in a number of locations. It suggests you use it in pre-design to compare it to the OPR of the project owner, that you use some sampling there. You can use it in design review for the plans and specs. During construction, you can sample the submittals. Any submittals that come in, you can do a sampling of those. Obviously, the type that I usually talk about and harp about is equipment installations and checklists. Those are some of the keys that I'll talk about a lot more in depth a little bit later. and you can sample training. Now, I think a lot of the standard rates they have listed in the guideline, they say, 10 to 20% is a typical sampling rate. Now, you can take a look at submittals and training, and they can be a different value of 5 to 10%. And again, these typically are minimums. They're guidelines. They're not code. They're not required, but these are guidelines that you should follow. So I guess here's really the facts. We can't check everything. I think that's where sampling gets it right. The fact that they set expectations to say, hey, you know what? We're not going to check everything. In fact, we're going to check, a certain percentage. And I think that's very valuable to know what that value is, and to set expectations. But, and also I think it's important to make sure and make very clear, regardless of where you set your expectations, where you set the sampling rate, that you also kind of remind everybody and set the expectations that, whatever we do does not relieve the engineers and the contractors from their duties. In fact, in the guideline, it says that, the contractors still are basically 100% responsible for checking everything. They can't sample anything because all their work should be completely gone through. And, I agree with that. But I also know that we all live in reality, so there are things that come up that kind of make things not work. And it's not always necessarily the contractor's fault. So let's kind of go through these things and break them down a little bit. So sampling during design, just whole hog, I don't believe in it. When we talk about, pre-design, making sure that the OPR matches what we do, again, it's all about setting expectations. We can't make sure that 100% of the OPR is covered. That might not be realistic, but we sure do a due diligence and make sure that we have, are following best practices in reviewing the OPR against the design documents. If there are some things that are very strong, and because you've been talking with a client, and in their OPR that are really important, what to check on in the design. So even in the pre-design, and making sure that things get, looked at properly. So sampling there doesn't make sense. I mean, if you're only going to take, page 1, page 10, you can miss a whole lot in between. So sampling doesn't make sense. Now, sampling on design reviews also doesn't make sense. Design reviews are probably the one most undervalued commodity that commissioning authorities do, and it is really super valuable. Again, because nothing's been purchased, it's all on paper. It's the right time to identify things that are inconsistencies and potential RFIs and change orders that are going to be going out in the field. So when you're talking about sampling on the design side, it does not make a lot of sense, especially if you dive deep into what they recommend as far as Annex N, and they talk about taking a percentage, taking a couple, like 10% of the, 10% of the plan, and just focusing on that area for all the plans, just kind of like doing a deep dive on this one section of the, of the design, going from mechanical to plumbing to electrical and making sure that everything's coordinated. We know that in reality that just doesn't work. There are things and areas that are, hot spots. If you're going to check coordination between mechanical and electrical, and even plumbing, you're going to check those mechanical rooms. You're going to check those electrical rooms. You're going to check those highly concentrated areas where stuff is going. And you're going to make sure that things are coordinated. I mean, if you take your 10%, and again, it's statistically, if you're just taking a look at office space, it's not right. But if you use your, just use your past knowledge and go after the mechanical rooms and that's your 10%, and that's okay. That's all I could get to look at. You know what? You're going to miss some other things. So it goes either way. You need to really look at the whole drawing to be able to identify, different things. And obviously, the way I look at it, I have a certain number of hours that I can invest in a design review. and I go through the design review, and when that, I try to hit the most important stuff, the frequently missed stuff first, and I kind of work down, and I could probably, I don't know if I've done a design review design review podcast, but hey, that may be another one. So, but again, you kind of take it in an order of importance as far as checking things out. So I don't believe in sampling a certain area for the design review, like the annex recommends. Again, construction submittals, maybe. I don't find a lot of value in construction submittals, but, that's not to me, that's not to say that there aren't huge opportunities to make sure that, something's caught early. That's the time to do it. Obviously, you want to, if you're going to, do submittals, you're going to do the most, the largest pieces, the most expensive pieces, the pieces with the greatest lead time, and you're going to make sure that you go through and you take a look at those first. So if you're going to do any, sampling submittals, maybe there's an opportunity. What about training? Going through and, at the end, it's best if you can be there at training. And, I just got done with a project that I was actually required to videotape the training. But really, you're going to be, the value is that be there at all, be there if at all possible. Because you're the one who actually knows probably the most about the systems that are going in there. If there's any questions, you're going to have some great input for the owner, some great value to make that training just that much more, just that much better. So if you can be there at all possible, sometimes you don't, the timing just doesn't work out and you can't be there. That's just the way things happen. But if at all possible, you want to be there for the important systems. You want to be there for the HVAC. You want to be there for the plumbing, electrical, if that's in your scope. And it all centers around what your scope is. And with all these things, I think that it's important to realize that the sampling rate, does have that asterisk. It says, hey, I'm going to check a certain percentage. If I don't find any defects, we're just going to move on. If we do find defects, then we're going to test another, percentage, and whether it be 10%, 20%. And again, that goes back to your commissioning plan and how you have that set up, what you're actually going to do. So those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Now I'm going to dive into the equipment. That's, kind of saved it for the last. And, it's one of my big pet peeves. But, things like, obviously, when you have a lot of a certain piece of equipment, it's real easy to kind of just broad brush it. But there's a couple of reasons why you shouldn't. I'll kind of go through some of my examples, and I'll talk about why afterwards. So, one of the classic examples, VAV boxes. I don't like sampling VAV boxes. I would rather test all the VAV boxes rather than just, really get down to 2 or 3 and make sure that those work. Because there's just things that go on that could happen to 1 or 2. And if you get those comfort complaints, it's just not, it's not real value to the client to dive deep on 2 or 3 when you could have just broad brushed and covered and make sure everything's working for your client instead. So here's some things that I learned over the past month. So talk about swapped thermostats. Now you can have, and we're going to get into the whys later, but you can have a VAV box. So you can have, say, in a classroom setting, and this was what it was. There was a classroom setting, and a teacher was hot, so she cranked the thermostat all the way up, and nothing happened. And a teacher across the hall said, hey, you know what? I am just boiling over here. So she's like, okay, I'm going to turn it all the way down. And the person, the other teacher's like, I turned it up and I'm getting colder. I'm like, why is that? And this, unfortunately, and it just kind of blows my mind, was in a brand new school. It was a K through 12 school that this happened. And in fact, it was just, it was a school that was commissioned. That's what really breaks my heart. I don't know who did the commissioning, but it was commissioned. I know that for a fact. And this was allowed to happen. This cross connection of thermostats to VAV boxes, and they had not only discomfort, but they were wasting energy. And it's like nobody can really troubleshoot this at the school level. It's not something that, even though you kind of say, well, it seems obvious, but if you don't know that the one classroom A and classroom B problems are related, you can't necessarily resolve them, especially if there's multiple problems like this. And I know that the one thing that just kind of blew my mind is there is literally companies out here, and you can use this, take this for what it's worth, but there are companies out there that are actually, their business model is going into new schools and correcting issues that they find and saving energy. This one school, they did, obviously the thermostat swap was relatively minor, but they ended up saving $400,000 a year in energy. And this is a public institution. This is taxpayer money. This really, it just it blows my mind that this is actually allowed to happen. But it can happen. You do sampling. This can happen on a routine basis. You just can't get around it. There's one, and here's one case where I have a project. It was a small project. There were 16 VAV boxes. I tested every single one of them, and I found out that one of the thermostats, didn't work. And I think to some of how I do this, I just don't do it one by one. I usually take a bunch, like 6 at a time or whatever, and I'll go through and I'll make sure that I'm doing it in order, and I'll actually set the thermostats, whether it's, way down, way up, in the middle, and I'll actually verify that it actually changes with the building automation system. That's when the temperature controls contractor is there. I'll verify that, I'll do like 6 boxes at a time, and we can go ahead and make sure that, yes, that thermostat that I know should be controlling the box that is serving that room is actually doing that job. And in that particular case, the thermostat wasn't working. The override wasn't working. The thermostat wasn't working. And, again, it was one of those that a thermostat that, if you remember last week, it just had a thumb wheel. It had a thumb wheel and override button and no digital readout display, anything. So you didn't know that anything was going wrong with it. And, it was just, that's the way it was. So there was another case where you're checking the discharge air. So you're testing whether or not it's heating and cooling. So you put it into heating mode, and some of the VAV boxes, they don't heat up, and you're thinking, well, there's something wrong with the heating coil. Well, we took a look at it and found out that, in fact, the discharge air temperature sensor, for whatever reason, wasn't put. It looked like it was installed at one point in time, but it was removed for some reason, and it wasn't put back in. So it was just kind of dangling there. And again, this happens for various reasons. Also, too, that it could be a case where it is the hydronic system, and it was just. I've had cases where there was stuff stuck in a strainer going to the coil, so there was absolutely no flow, very little flow to no flow, going to this heating coil. So all these things happen, and you're never going to catch them if you're just going to be doing a sampling. If I was to sample 16 boxes, I might test 2 or 3. And would I ever check, whatever I got all the issues that were, up with that? No, it wouldn't have happened. I would have picked the wrong ones invariably, and I would have missed it. And I would have felt, pretty bad about, hey, you know what? I didn't test that one, and there was comfort complaints that, stem from that. So that's VAV boxes. So again, sampling with VAV boxes, no. And those are some kind of fresh examples from the last couple of weeks. Unit heaters and cabinet unit heaters are also another one of those things, because they're not necessarily tied into the building automation system, that they get missed all the time. I've even had owners saying, hey, you know what, these unit heaters, they never worked. And it's unfathomable to me to say, hey, you know what, you bought this piece of equipment, you put it in, and it doesn't work. And in fact, it happened to me again. It happened on a project where there was two buildings, a small outbuilding and a main building, and the small outbuilding did not have a hydronic system at all. But there were unit heaters that were in the main building. But they had one, and it was a simple mistake. There were 6 unit heaters in there. One of those was actually located in the outbuilding. Now, they installed it, they put it in, they wired it up, but there was no hot water to go to it. And again, as far as the drawings were concerned, the contractors did what the contractors needed to do, but that didn't cut it for the owner. That space would have been, it would have chilled down, it would have been cool. They could have been, burst pipes, things like that. That was not okay. And it's funny enough, as many times as I've looked at it, I'm like, I thought somebody would have just mentioned it, or, because it had to make sense to, a number of people on the project, but it was never escalated to the point that somebody said, okay, you know what, we're going to have to, just bring back the, or get rid of the hot water unit heater and put in an electric one. It never occurred to anybody to escalate that. So when I had finally had to bring it up, I'm like, it was kind of late in the project, but I'm like, I thought somebody had handled this already. That was my assumption. So that was on me. But, again, it happens that, there are just things that can't be connected. And again, there are other, other cabinet unit heaters that they never get connected. It just blows my mind. It might be the hot water. It might be, hey, they never got insulated. Hey, they never got the electrician, never came back and hooked up the power wiring for these things. It's a number of things, but the unit heaters and the cabinet unit heaters, those things are always something. It's a high probability that something will go wrong with those pieces of equipment. So let's talk about why they go wrong. Well, in a couple of cases, and this kind of goes beyond just the pieces of equipment that I mentioned, you have young installers. So the young installers may not necessarily know exactly what to do, where to land things, things like that. The VAV box sometimes is not in the same room that it serves. Sometimes you have a VAV box that is in a room, but it serves the next room, and the box that it serves is in an adjacent space. So they end up wiring to the nearest box. Seems logical, but especially since they don't have the holistic approach. They're not following the ductwork to say, hey, you know what, this is not connecting to the diffusers in this room. That doesn't make any sense. I'm sure if you get more seasoned veterans in there, it would not happen. But with kind of young bucks or people that are even rushed, it happens all the time, and especially if they're maybe side by side. Sometimes you mix up the wires and terminate them in the wrong boxes. A lot of times you have it wasn't your fault at all. Other trades came behind you. They pulled on your wire. They cut your wire. They stretched your wire. I mean, all it takes is stretching the wire to kind of make these micro breaks and these fine controls wires. And all of a sudden it's working. It's not working. It's working. It's not working. And it just drives controls guys crazy that they can't identify exactly where the break is. If it pulls out, if something's pulled out or not terminated properly, that's at the end of a wire. That's pretty easy to identify. But if it's something that's in the middle of the wire, more than likely they're going to pull a whole new wire instead of trying to troubleshoot exactly where in the wire it is, because they're certainly not going to splice it. That's something that's not going to happen. What about the old classic, it was Friday, or it was the end of the day? A lot of times when you're dealing with these, certain situations where you have the issues, it's as simple as that. As simple as, okay, I don't know where I left off. Or I button things up to make them look like I finished, but I forgot that I needed to go back and terminate that or complete a couple more steps. So a lot of those are, very, very typical. Left mid-installation. Same difference as the end of the day, mid-installation. They just, hey, I forgot where I was. Especially some of the other ones, some of the malicious ones, like the sock and the strainer. There's so many more malicious issues out there. I think every commissioning authority out there has, 2 or 3 of them that they are like, yeah, there was a big pipe and somebody threw a 4x4 in there and it just kind of jammed up, just anything. There's all these examples of disgruntled employees. Somebody got fired on a Friday and they wanted to get back at their employer. So that's what they did. It's not beyond some of these, it's certainly not professional. And, a lot of them just say, hey, you know what? I'm out of here and I can't believe that you're letting me go. So I'm going to make it hard on your life to be able to go through and troubleshoot and try to find exactly what I did. But I'm going to, leave you a little Easter egg and you're going to have to try to find it or, just have the owner deal with it for the rest of the building's existence until something gets chained off. A lot of times too, it's something that is too hard for somebody to finish. And it's a real difficult situation. They don't want to get to it. And they leave it for somebody else. This happens, especially with the controls guys a lot. They'll be left to clean somebody else's, programming up or graphics up or, some of the wiring. They'll have to go ahead and troubleshoot it a lot of times, especially if they, have multiple people that have been, working with them, working on them. It's really no one person's job to make sure that it works. Why? Because that's your job as a commissioning authority. You're the one who actually go through and make sure that everything works. Too, it's I think the last thing I have on here is things get closed up by other people. It's not just yourself that says, hey, I want to look like I'm finished. It's other people saying, hey, you know what, we need to tidy up here. And they need to close things up, close some, junction boxes up, put some panels on and everything like that. And they just don't know things aren't complete. They want it to look complete. They want it to look tidy. They want to look like they've, completed their job or they're doing their job or they're getting on the contractors and making sure that, progress is being made. And they just close things up. And it doesn't work. All right, well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. Hope this was helpful. If you did find it helpful, let me know. If we have a unique situation that you've found and identified with sampling, just let me know that too. You can always reach out to me at matt@hvac360.com. If you know somebody who's looking for this information, consider passing this episode along and sharing it. If you're not a subscriber, again, consider joining the growing community of people just like you over at HVAC360.com for more weekly goodness. Lastly, I'd be greatly honored, and it helps the podcast out so much if you leave me a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. And if you do that, I'll give you a shout out. So, did that before, I'll do it again. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of HVAC 360. Happy Thanksgiving, and let the sampling of those delicious dishes begin. I'm Matt Nelson, helping you be the best and the brightest in the field of HVAC. And as always, know what you build and share what you know.